think we're going to go ahead and get started if you guys want to make your way here, if you're coming up here. All right, so as we're doing that, I'm going to do my little intro and everything. Welcome to One Quick Coffee with Infomedia. So this is the live version of our podcast, which is One Quick Question with Infomedia. We can't give you coffee on a podcast, unfortunately. But at the podcast and at these events, what we're doing here is trying to share the expertise that Infomedia has just with everybody who wants it, our clients and everybody else too. So at Infomedia, we design and build websites. We also do things like create content, we write for websites, do photo, video for websites, basically anything digital that supports your site, we can help with. So if you are interested in becoming a client, find me after and I'll hook you, I'll find somebody who can help. Or if you're an introvert like I am, so this is a good spot for me, definitely, and you don't want to grab somebody and ask a question, just head to our website, infomedia.com, and fill out the contact form. So I'm Carrie. I am the Vice President of Strategic Planning at Infomedia, and I'm also the speaker today. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so the topic today is writing with AI, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Or as I'm going to structure it, the bad, the good, and the ugly, because I'm a pessimist. That's not the only reason. So I wanted to start a little bit with what my background is, so you know the skills that I'm bringing to the talk today, and also the assumptions that I'm going to be making. And I also wanted to share a couple assumptions that I'm making about you. So my degree is in journalism and mass communications. I worked as a copy editor and copywriter. Actually, one of my former coworkers at the Birmingham Post-Herald is here, so it was a long time ago when I worked in newspapers. But I've also worked for some really large corporations like Time Warner and Penguin Random House, and then a lot of small businesses. So I do that through Infomedia primarily, and then I've done some freelancing too. I also co-founded Church Street Coffee and Books, and I have a podcast and a book where I profile local business owners, so that's called The Localist, and it's up every week. And I mention all that, not because I like to talk about myself, but just so you'll know that I'm approaching this talk as a business owner and as a writer. So those are kind of like the lenses that I'm bringing to this. And I assume that most of you are using AI or want to use AI either to build your business or to build your brand. So it may be a small business, it may be a bigger business, but that's kind of the lens that we're going to look at this through today. So I don't want to spend very much time defining AI because I assume that you've probably already either researched it for yourself and you know, or you've researched it for yourself and realized that you don't really care. But I did think it would be good to lay some kind of baseline. So I asked ChatGPT to write a description, and it was really boring. So I asked them to write another description and explain it like I'm 5, and they said things like computer magic and a super helpful friend, which was also not that great. So I did a few more prompts and actually Googled a little bit too, and got to what I think is probably a better definition for me, which is that conventional software is programmed to perform a task, and AI is programmed to learn to perform a task. So say you're learning to draw a circle. A conventional computer program, you're going to program it to the physical, this is how you draw a circle. For AI, you're going to show it a bunch of circles and say, figure it out. So that's kind of the definition we're working off, but we're not talking about circles, we're talking about words. So there are so many AI tools out there. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just a list to show you that there are a lot of writing-focused AI tools out there. ChatGPT is on the list. It's not the best AI platform. It might be the worst. I don't know. But it is the one that there's a free version available, and it's very accessible to everybody. So it's the one I'm probably going to focus on most today. But everything we're talking about applies to all of these platforms to some extent. It just may be a little ChatGPT is going to be a little worse than, say, Jasper at writing in a certain style. Here are the ones that we use pretty frequently at Infomedia. We all use ChatGPT to some extent. Grammarly, we use a lot in especially people sending emails to clients. just to clean up grammar a little bit, make sure the tone is, it's like that you're being really harsh here. That's good to know. And then we use Gemini some and Cast Magic for our podcast. Okay, so I thought I'd start with the bad. Like I said, there is a reason for that. So there are two main things that I think AI is pretty bad at that we have to watch out for in everything we do. One is getting facts correct. AI is just not good for research. It does this thing we call hallucinating, where it makes stuff up. And it does this a lot. Sometimes it just combines two facts in an incorrect way. Sometimes it just makes something up out of thin air. And the thing about it is it's really hard to find when it's doing that, because when you read it, it all sounds correct. So one example, I was an editor for a long time, and if I get a piece of work from a writer who, it's a mess, it's like, this is longer than I wanted, it's always longer, they never write shorter. If it's longer than I wanted, and the sentence structure is all over the place and it's boring, I know this person also probably didn't get their facts right. But when I read a piece where everything else is correct, there's something in my mind that's like, okay, the facts are probably pretty correct here too. And we actually bring that bias to things we read from ChatGPT or from any other AI. Is it's written correctly, it must be right. They did their facts, they researched their facts, and that's completely not true. And it's really hard once you see the piece and you read it to actually pick out where are the problems. So I had an example. I asked ChatGPT to write a bio about me. I'm going to show you guys a lot of blocks of text. You don't have to read any of them, so ignore it if you want to. But this did a pretty awesome job in a lot of ways. It says I'm a multifaceted writer, entrepreneur, and cultural curator. Wow, that's cool. Like a lot of stuff, like born and raised in Alabama, fueled by a voracious appetite for reading and writing. This is very AI copy, by the way. They like adjectives and adverbs a lot. You can read, it has more things about my degree. The problem here is that a lot of this is not true. I'm from Kansas City, which if you know me during Chiefs season, you're probably well aware. My degree is in journalism. I almost got an English degree. I wrote a thesis and did not defend it. So I appreciate the bump there, but I don't have an English degree. I have a journalism degree. And I did go to a small liberal arts school in Birmingham, but it wasn't Birmingham Southern. So, if you're throwing an event and somebody doesn't give you a bio, which they do all the time, and you just say, write a bio for this person, you're like, wow, this all sounds right. All of that sounds correct. It's just not correct. And here's the second page of the bio is another issue. So I won't subject you to all of this, but for one thing, I highlighted the Renaissance woman part just because I think that's awesome, and I would like to be referred to as a Renaissance woman from here on out. But it says that I've penned several books. Now, this isn't technically wrong. I do have several unpublished versions of the Great American Novel in a drawer, but I've published one book. So even this, that's not technically untrue, is still a problem because ultimately it is untrue. And if we're publishing this as our brand, it's putting stuff out that's not technically true, or we're writing about somebody else, that ends up being a big problem. All right, so the other big problem I see with AI is that AI copy is not typically persuasive or inspiring. So I like this quote from Rick Rubin. He's a music producer. He has this book on creativity. I forget what it's called. Creativity is in the title, but they probably have it here because it's really popular. It's a really good book. But he's talking about AI-generated music. And he's like, I enjoy some kind of AI-generated music, or at least it doesn't bother me when it's on. Sometimes I find it funny because they put two things together that were that doesn't work, But I'm never inspired by it. And he did leave room. He's like, I'm not inspired by it yet, and that is true. Some people think that we will get to a point that AI writing is inspired. I'm not one of those people, but a lot of people did. Maybe they're right, but we're not there yet. A lot of times, AI written copy is really formulaic and cheesy. So you probably are familiar. It really loves this structure where you have a topic sentence and then bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, and then a summary. And we all know that that is a style of writing that we learned when we were in ninth grade, But the reason we learned that style of writing is because in ninth grade, we were learning how to organize our thoughts. And that's a really good structure for learning to organize. It's not interesting. Like, what's interesting to people is starting with a story or starting with a fact that you don't understand why it works, and you're kind of working that together. And that's not really how AI writes. Now, how did we get here? Well, we kind of know how we got here because for so long, Google was saying it's frequency that matters. They didn't care if you have a lawn business and you don't have 3 blogs to come out with every week. They just want you to come out with the 3 blogs anyway, And then we have social media that also rewards frequency. And also we were told you have to be on every form of social media. So of course we're exhausted. And if something else can write these posts, we're like, go right ahead, But now those platforms, to some extent, especially Google, are backing off of that. Like, they used to reward frequency, and now they're saying quality is more important than quantity. And social media is definitely still awarding quantity, but not necessarily with words. They want the quantity of videos. And it's a much more accepted practice now to say you don't have to be on every form of social media. Pick 1 or 2 that are good for you, that really work for you, and do that well. So now the industries have kind of changed to where we don't have to be creating the same post that's kind of nonsense anyway for a blog, Instagram, LinkedIn, every single place. It's better to do something that actually matters, because to some extent, if you're not being persuasive or inspiring, why are you writing? And I know that sounds very writery to say that, but it's also practical as a business. If you have a post that the only thing that it's doing is just being a post, why is it there? It's not really, if people aren't engaging with it, it's not going to be rewarded by the algorithm anyway. It's not doing you any favors. So that is a problem I find with AI. That's the bad. And now I'm going to say some good things because there are ways that we can use AI. I mean, that would be pretty disappointing, right? If I was like, bye, don't use it. There are some good things about using AI as a tool. So there's this author, Hugh Howey, that explained this, I think, pretty well. He was talking about designing his own book covers, which I don't recommend. But he was like, what's cool about the AI is that I can get about 80% as good as a professional, and I have zero background in this. And I would maybe, we'll disagree with the 80%, but ultimately that's what is really cool about AI. You may be able to get 80% as good as I would be at writing, and I have 20 years experience, So that's pretty amazing in and of itself. It's just kind of, the problem with that is, where is it okay to get an 80%, There are places in our business that it's this is fine, I only need to be this to be 80% good. But I want my website copy to be 100% good, because even if my copy is 100%, I'm still fighting with Google to get it noticed. You're not going to end up on the first page of Google if your copy is only 80% decent. You're not even going to be in the running. It's kind of the same thing with social media. I want my posts, we're putting a lot of work into making these posts now. We're basically all part-time videographers. I don't want to work on that and then have something that is so generic that it's getting an 80% and nobody's connecting with it, and I'm not getting likes anyway. So that is kind of the rule that I kind of follow. Where am I okay with 80%, and where do I need to kill it? Because that's not, in my opinion, the place to use AI. At least not to just use it and not touch it after. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few specific ways that I do think AI is useful, and I personally use it and then use it at work. One is organizing, outlining, and checking gaps in your work. So, like I said, AI is very good at creating a structure, so sometimes we can use that. What I tend to do is actually write my own outline or write my own piece first, and then I might ask AI, how would you outline this piece? And then I kind of use some ideas and maybe change some others. And outlining this talk is a good example. Because originally, I had a different outline for this talk, and it really wasn't working. It was boring. I didn't want to subject you to it. So I asked ChatGPT, like, how would you outline this talk? This is what it's called, this is what it's about. And it said to do it in the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I was like, okay. Now, is that their idea? Kind of. Or is it my idea because I titled the talk that way in the first place? Kind of. But that's kind of like the ideal way to work with this. It's giving you kind of a concept. But then when I actually did the talk that way, I was in this section where I was sharing the ways you can use AI, and I kept having to use caveats like, but be careful about your facts and be careful about being inspiring. And I was like, this doesn't make sense, so then I switched it. So all that to say, like, AI can be really helpful in writing an outline, or if you've already written a piece, you've written something, and you're like, did I miss anything? It's good to have it do something, and then I can say like, oh yeah, maybe I should touch on this. Or maybe they included that, but I still don't think that's important. So I think use it to find the gaps in your work, to organize. It's a good tool for that. That's annoying. Yeah, Kayla's doing a dance to it. It's also good for generating ideas or brainstorming, especially when you're completely stuck. So podcast titles is a big one, like a big area like this for me. Email subject lines can be a big one. Like things that you're just like, ugh, I've already put all the work into creating the thing, and then I have to like come up with a snappy something to say. So here's an example of a podcast I did on workplace reopening, and these are the ideas that it gave me. I asked it for a bunch of ideas. Now, some of these are terrible. Like a journey from neglect to noteworthy is like, you're trying really hard there. A melody, rekindling the melody of memories, like, give me a break. But I did like some parts of these. So like there were a couple words that stood out to me. I was like, yeah, I like how these are used, but I didn't like those actual headlines. So the headline I came up with was Restoring Workplace Musical Legacy, which I think to me works. And I did get there more quickly and with less irritation because AI gave me some ideas, but I wasn't just taking those ideas and slapping one of them onto the podcast. And we can use that, again, for any of those, like you're writing a headline for a blog, and AI doesn't understand what a blog headline needs to be, what a podcast headline needs to be-ish. So it's probably gonna write it in somewhat of the format that you're wanting to use. Okay, it's very good at any formulaic or structured writing. Like the more structured a piece is supposed to be, the better it's gonna be. I don't mean like a blog, because while that does follow a certain structure, it still really needs to be readable to people also. But for something like a job description, this is nobody's job. I just made this up like 5 minutes before we did the slide deck. But it's great because I can just write exactly like this is what I want out of the job, and it literally in the way it does in 30 seconds, like spit out that exact format. I didn't format that, it formatted it, Now it still got things wrong. It said it's a remote position, it made stuff up. Like you don't want to do this and just be like, you're hired, and then somebody say like, I work in Wisconsin. You're like, whoops, because it says it's remote. But it's still, it's getting you to a point that is like, writing a job description is like the mirror side of writing a cover letter. It's just horrible. I hate it. So this really helps. And anything that is really formulaic or structured like this, AI is going to be pretty good at. It's also to some extent good at aggregating and summarizing. Now, I would say to some extent because it will still often pull in other facts. So if you're saying, I want to write a blog, and you're just going to feed AI 3 other blogs and say, summarize this, I wouldn't do that because it's going to add more stuff and it's going to be really hard to pull out. But if you're doing it for yourself, you're like, I just need a little background on this, and I'm not going to take this as gospel. I'm just going to I just want a general idea. It's decent for that. I was talking before with somebody about meetings. It's kind of the same. If you want a general idea of the meeting, sometimes it can be decent at that. But it's also going to give some incorrect information. It's going to summarize things a little bit differently. There's also a lot that happens with our physically, that we communicate a lot through just the way our faces look, the way our body language is, and you don't get that. So when you see meeting notes from AI, they can be really tricky. And I do know from personal experience, if you're talking badly about the person who sold the project on the call, then they will also get a summary of that. I actually wasn't the person, and it was a joke. It was good. But that is something to keep in mind if you have AI summarizing your call, that most of us are never going to read through this thing, but some people do. So you have to also be very careful about what you say. All right, so Cast Magic is a good example of this for us. So we use that tool called Cast Magic, and the show notes for the podcast, we use AI to write. And this is because I'm okay getting an 80% on show notes, because it's not a primary source for anybody. The primary sources are the podcast or the transcript. People are just looking at show notes as essentially like, I forgot when she talked about this, I need a link for this. It's not the primary source. So this way we can just use Cast Magic. I don't have to have somebody listen to an hour of me talking to somebody just to write a paragraph that very few people are going to resource anyway. Now, I do have to look at that because it always puts some mistakes in. I think I interviewed a artist, Morgan Jones Johnston, and she had an art project called You Painted My Insides, and they called it just the project called My Insides. It's like, that's a little weird. So you do need somebody looking at this, but it's like a decent place to use it. It can also work for first drafts. Now, I'm gonna, again, caveat this. Like, I don't use it for my first drafts, but I'm a writer, and that's a little bit different. Like, I want it to originate with me and just use AI as a supplement. And you do have to really worry about it baking in some of those errors. But there are some areas of life that it is nice to have it. One place is writing an email that has like an emotionally difficult component. So if you're having to apologize to somebody or call somebody out, like this is just an email apologizing for taking a conference room, which is also made up. I didn't do this. But unlike some people here, I check our calendars. Just kidding, it's fine. But the thing that's difficult about writing an email like this is not actually writing the email. It's the emotional hurdle that you have to go through to be like, I'm embarrassed, I did this thing I shouldn't have done, how am I gonna say this? So having ChatGPT knock something up that then I'm gonna edit and send to the person is actually really helpful. Okay, so it can also be decent for competitive analysis. Now, this is very different than a competitive analysis that you would pay for, which is gonna be far more accurate. And I would put like keywords in this too. I didn't feel strongly enough to put it on the actual slide, but for competitive analysis and keywords, if all you're looking for is a general idea of what another company does, it can give you a general idea. If you want to know what are keywords that perform, what is the competition here, is this really gonna work for me, it's not gonna help you with that. So I ran a competitive analysis on Infomedia. Obviously, you can't read all of this, but it got some things really right. It says we do customized solutions, that's true. We have a strong emphasis on support, that's true. Content and SEO, client education, all of this is accurate. It lists experience and reliability twice, which I assume is because we're very experienced and reliable. So none of this was bad. And if I were using this to research a competitor, it is actually fairly helpful. You're like, oh yeah, like they have a support department. Should I have a support department? That kind of thing. It is missing some key pieces of what we do. It's missing our entire photo, video, like component. It's missing design, also development. So basically most of the things we do. But it does get some things pretty right. But then also this is actually like annotating where it came from. All of these facts are coming from an old landing page and a blog that I wrote in 2013. So like most things are not actually going to pull the resources for you. So this time we're seeing that's why it's missing things. It's a very narrow view. So we have to know that with all of AI, like when it doesn't show you what it's pulling from, it may actually be just giving you a really skewed view. Now, I still think this is helpful. If I have a competitor and I don't want to pay for a competitive analysis and I can just do a few keystrokes and see like, oh, this is a good idea, like that's worth something to me. It's not the same thing as paying to have this done. And the same thing, you can ask it like, what keywords does this website use? And it'll give you an idea. You can ask it 2 or 3 times and it'll give you different ideas. So it's not super accurate, But also, if you're writing a blog or if you have a small business, you're like, I have no budget for this stuff, it can actually be a little bit helpful. And it can be good for style and quality control. And the main thing I'm going to point to here is Grammarly. And then there are other programs that do it. We also have AI baked into pretty much every program now that will do this to some extent. But I don't use Grammarly a lot. You saw my resume, basically, and my mom was an English teacher. But a lot of, it can be super helpful if you're just I don't feel very confident in the tone of my emails and in the punctuation and the grammar, that kind of stuff, that can help. So I did want to also share a couple of tips. One is for writing a good prompt, because what you get out of AI is going to be really influenced by what you're asking it to do for you. So just be as detailed as you can in what you're asking AI to do. That can also help to some extent with the facts you're getting back. Now, this is not foolproof, but the more facts that you tell it, the less likely it is to just source them from online, and you may get better facts that way. Now, it still generally pulls something wonky, but you'll still do better. In that bio of myself, if I had said, write a bio of, and maybe didn't even use my name, so it's not going out to the internet, but a writer who's done and then listed all the things, it would have done a better job than trying to source information about me. It probably wouldn't have made stuff up about where I went to college, for example. Also be specific about how you want the information. So you saw the prompts at the beginning. I said, explain it like I'm 5, explain it in 50 words. That can be really helpful. When I do podcast titles, I say, give me 10 examples. Otherwise, sometimes it does 3, sometimes it does 30. So just directing it that way. You can also say, I want a 500-word blog post that has 3 subheads in it. It does pretty well. It performs pretty well at that kind of thing. Do ask it the same thing over and over, because it will give you different answers. Google doesn't really do that. If you're in the same spot and you Google the same thing, you're probably going to get the same results. But ChatGPT, a lot of times especially, you can ask it, pull keywords from this site, like I said, 3 different times, and you'll get slightly different answers. So if you don't like your answer, we want to treat this as a human. I find myself wanting to say please, thank you. I don't want to ask the same thing twice. I don't want to be rude, but you can. It's fine. In a prompt, grammar and capitalization don't matter, so just write what you want to write. Okay, how do you avoid errors? The best tip I have really is to start it yourself in the first place. Don't use AI for the first pass at something. Use it to fill in the gaps and stuff. But if you can't do that, at least have a bulleted list of the facts that are important to you, so that you at least know these facts are correct. You can also look at the text, and before you try to read it as does this make sense, highlight everything that is a fact, and then you can fact check that. And it's, again, not perfect, but it's a little easier to find those problems than it would be when you start reading it and you just get into it and you're like, it's probably fine. Again, only use AI to inspire certain phrasing instead of to write the whole thing. And you can ask it to write a template. So for example, say you want it to write an email to a client about signing their scope. You can say, write a template email that I would send to a client about signing their scope, and then you're putting the facts in. So if you want to use it for a structure, tell it it's a structure, tell it to write you a template, and then put your own facts in. Okay, that was the good. Now it's the ugly. All right, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because most of the practical stuff we've already talked about, but there are a few things just to know if we're going to be using this. One is I did want to touch on plagiarism and intellectual property. The ethics of this are very interesting, and I'm not qualified to speak on them really. I have opinions, but they're just opinions. In case you were wondering, I'm not a lawyer or an ethicist. However, a lot of people are worried about, am I going to get in trouble for copyright infringement if I publish something from AI? My opinion as a non-lawyer would be probably not. The law is still being worked out here, and I doubt the law is going to fall on the side of the creator instead of technology. So that's unfortunate for humanity, but good for your business. However, so you're probably not going to get sued for this, but you still might look really stupid, and you still might lose clients over this. So here's an example. I asked AI to tell me a story. So That's the only prompt. There were no prompts before. So its story is, in a land far, far away, there lived a young girl named Alice. One day, wandering through the woods, she stumbled on a strange rabbit hole. She followed the rabbit down the hole and found herself in a fantastical underground world. So, are you going to get sued by Lewis Carroll for copyright infringement? No, he's dead. The book is in public domain, I think, and he would have been canceled if he lived today. So, you're probably fine. But are you going to look stupid if you say this is an original story? Yes, like everyone knows it's not an original story. And this one we know, but what happens when you come across something that's actually super familiar to a lot of people, or at least for a couple people who find you online and will definitely tear you down, and like, throwing up your hands and saying like, well, AI did it is not gonna solve the problem. It may not get you sued, but it's not gonna get your customers back. It's not gonna undo that damage. So even though it may not be illegal, it's still a problem. Also, there's a lot of bias and discrimination in AI writing. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of bias and discrimination in humanity. And AI is fed by, we just poured all these things that we've been writing for years and years into these large language models, and that is what AI is using to function. So it'll do things like, you'll ask it for images of a doctor and lawyers, and it's always going to show you men, and nurses and secretaries are always women. Secretaries we shouldn't be talking about anyway. Anyway, so it's like, it is going to have these inherent biases that as people, as individuals, we try to continually weed out of our writing, hopefully, but we're not even realizing that, because to some extent, like, this stuff comes in, it sounds right, and we're like, well, it's probably right, it said it's fine. And a lot of this is actually like pretty problematic. So you can be like saying things inappropriately, perpetuating stereotypes and not even necessarily realizing it, especially if you're not reading carefully and trying to take that stuff out. AI is also pretty bad for misinformation and propaganda. Sometimes it's funny, like when people were asking Google's AI to tell them how to stick cheese to pizza, and it said use glue, okay? That's, maybe not harmless, but probably is going to be fine. But then, we're going into election season, and there are countries who are, feeding lots of misinformation into our news cycle using AI to do this. So it's just, is it something we're necessarily dealing with on a day-to-day basis as a business? Probably not, but it's probably worthwhile to know as humans. And just general, deterioration of our skills. Again, this is maybe an issue globally, culturally, but let's talk about it as each of us personally. The thing about writing skills is that writing skills are critical thinking skills. In order to write something, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. Most of the work is in thinking through something and figuring out how to present it. So this doesn't mean don't use AI or you'll soon be stupid. That's not what I'm trying to say here. I am saying use it as a tool and not as a crutch. Some of the things we talked about today, working on things yourself and using AI to supplement is probably just a healthier practice for us as people and probably better for our business as well. As far as is AI going to replace human writing, I don't think so. I hope not. We're in a bookstore, so let's say no. But I don't think so. I think a good analogy is a microwave. We all have microwaves, and we still go to restaurants. It's not that we don't have to. And there is something different about having food prepared in a restaurant or for somebody who loves you instead of popping something in a microwave. Neither one is necessarily bad. Both are useful and a part of our lives, but one hasn't made the other obsolete. And to extend the metaphor even further, you can't just throw anything in the microwave. If you throw a fork in there, you're in trouble. And the same is kind of true for AI. You can't just use it for everything and walk away and be like, well, that was easy. It does need some critical thought too.